Well, today my title of my sermon is Zeus and Hermes. Zeus and Hermes. And we're going to be spending most of our time in Acts 14, which was the conclusion. The conclusion of Acts 14 was in the scripture reading. And I almost gave this message last week, but did not. It gave something else that struck my mind more. But we read about the last three Sabbaths we've read from Acts 14, and that's where Zeus and Hermes are mentioned. A reminder, on December 1st, I gave a sermon entitled Helping People Who Don't Want to Be Helped. And last week I gave a sermon entitled Lead Them to God. So it's obvious my line of thinking is how to help people who are having trials, how to help people who are having adversity. That's obviously a lot on my mind. And so I thought, though, this seems a little different, but on the other hand, this is another lesson of leadership and service. Another lesson of leadership and service concerning the lesson in Acts 14 about Zeus and Hermes. And you see, you understand that I'm a firm believer in brethren having gifts. I'm a firm believer in you all having gifts. And as you have gifts, you have opportunity to serve. That I'm not wanting you to focus in on any one physical leader. You know, your leader is Jesus Christ, God the Father and Christ the Son. They're your leaders that you look to. And of course, they are the focal point of our religion. They're the focal point of our congregation. We don't look to any man or group of men to be intermediaries between us and Christ. We don't want that. We haven't had that for a long time. But not only am I wanting you not to look to any one person as a leader, I'm really hoping that you will also develop your leadership and that you will look for opportunities to develop your leadership. And that's why I've given the last two messages, and that's why I'm giving it today. So again, we're going to look at this, how the story of Zeus and Hermes came up. We'll see the good thing that the Apostle Paul and the Apostle Barnabas did. Let's go to Acts chapter 14. The first 7 verses are not really dealing with the story, but let's build the context. Acts 14, verse 1. Now it happened in Iconium that they went together to the synagogue of the Jews, and so spoke that a great multitude both of the Jews and the Greeks believed. Paul and Barnabas went to the synagogue because they spoke on the Sabbath in the synagogue. Also in the early New Testament church, they had home churches. But they also spoke in the synagogue. And speaking in the synagogue, this was after Christ had died. This is after Christ was resurrected. I would certainly say that they were not going to endorse everything said or done by the synagogue. However, it was a collection of people on the Sabbath day, and they took advantage of that opportunity on the Sabbath day to preach the gospel. In other words, many things done in the synagogue would be very biblical, but not everything done in the synagogue is biblical. It could be traditional. And it may be something that the tradition was not an offensive thing, but Paul used it as an opportunity to preach. In fact, in chapter 13, after they were reading from the Bible what they would do, Paul got their attention because they had impromptu kind of discussions in the system back there. So Paul kind of got their attention to speak up, and he talked about the gospel. So here they are in the synagogue on the Sabbath day. Jews were there and Gentiles were there, and they were listening. But, verse 2, there was an objection. The unbelieving Jews stirred up the Gentiles and poisoned their minds against the brethren. So there were obviously, unbelieving Jews who were not involved with the gospel of God, but were involved in their Judaism, and they would try to poison what was being done because they either thought it was a threat or whatever the reason was. We just see it says they poisoned their minds. Therefore the two fellows stayed there a long time, speaking boldly in the Lord, who was hearing witness to the word of his grace, granting signs and wonders to be done by their hands. So they decided to stay a little longer, since there was either an opportunity to preach and an opportunity to refute. Verse 4, but the multitude of the city was divided. Part of the people sided with the Jews, and part of the people sided with the apostles. Even though both were keeping the Sabbath, both were not following the same things. In fact, a lot of people keep the Sabbath for the wrong reason. And so just because someone keeps the Sabbath doesn't make it of God. In fact, that's why I don't think the Sabbath is the sign of God's people. Let me repeat that. Here's why I don't think the Sabbath is a sign of God's people. Because some people keep the Sabbath who are not following God. I believe keeping the Sabbath is a great thing to do. I believe it's the fourth commandment. However, sometimes people think if someone keeps the Sabbath, that automatically proves something. Not necessarily. In that particular town, there were Jews keeping the Sabbath, and there were apostles keeping the Sabbath, but they were divided. Because there's more to the way of God than just the fourth commandment. In fact, there's all 10 commandments, and there could be other instructions as well. But when a violent attempt was made by both the Gentiles and Jews with the rulers to abuse them, to stone them, okay, here they were trying to now hurt. There was now not just an action of words against them. They were going to abuse them verbally, but they were going to abuse them physically. That was the nature back then. We have not yet quite gotten there yet. We're getting closer to that as a nation. But it was very more common back then to not only have the verbal abuse, but have the physical abuse and the physical confrontation. That is picking up in our society today. And we may degenerate to the time back of the Bible time. We may have to deal with a lot more, not only verbal abuse in this nation, we may actually deal with physical abuse. It's building and probably happening at times where the media is not covering it, but it's popping, it's brewing, and maybe we'll get there, maybe not. We'll just see how what history unfolds. But back then, they wanted to abuse them, they wanted to stone them. So they became aware of it, and they left and went to the different surrounding cities. They wanted to go to different cities. So in verse 8, they came to Lystra, the town of Lystra. And there was a certain man there who did not have strength in his feet. He was crippled from his mother's womb, and he had never walked. Now, these things happen from time to time. People have disabilities from birth. People have challenges from birth. And this time, this man heard Paul speaking. Paul, observing him intently and seeing that he had faith to be healed, said with a loud voice, "Stand up and straighten your feet. Stand up and be on your feet." And the man leapt and walked. Now when the people saw that what Paul had done, they raised their voices in their language, saying, "The gods have come down to us in a likeness of men." They've come down in the likeness of men. Verse 12, in the New King James Version it says, "And Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called Hermes, because he was the chief speaker." Now I know the King James says something differently. I have on the handout there, the King James says Jupiter, but when you look it up in the Greek, the correct word is Zeus, which means shine or bright. And the King James says Mercury, but the New King James says Hermes, which again is the Greek word. Now, on the handout I have a quick definition here, just so you're aware of this. And I just use the old-fashioned World Book Encyclopedia. I was looking things up both on my phone, different places, and I still have an old World Book. Just a little background information. You can check it. Today you can find all sorts of background information. But Zeus was the king of the gods and the supreme ruler of the people in Greek mythology. He originally was a god of the sky. He had the same powers as the Roman god Jupiter. Then, according to the World Book Encyclopedia, Hermes was the messenger of the gods in Greek mythology. He protected travelers, and the Greeks believed he brought good luck. So it's interesting if you look back in the Bible, Acts 14:12, they call Barnabas Zeus, which many commentators think it's real interesting because Zeus was the one in charge. And so many commentators wonder, how did Barnabas show himself to be the one in charge? Because who's the prominent one throughout the book of Acts? It's Paul. He's the prominent one, and he's the prominent speaker. He was the chief speaker. Now, these people are calling these men gods. Now, the lesson I want us to consider today is not only are we looking at it historically, because I like to look at things historically, but I like Christian living as well. And the Christian living would be, you as a leader, how would you have responded if someone called you a god or goddess? Well, you may say, well, that was pretty over the edge. But what if someone called you a special teacher? Or if someone called you a special whatever, a special religious person? What if someone called you the end-time Elijah? What if someone called you one of the two witnesses? Would you then say, well, I was wondering how long they would take to recognize me? See, because that would be a lack of humility. That would be prideful. And I'm wanting you as a teacher to understand, as you as a leader, I'm wanting you to not be swayed by compliments, not be swayed by praise, that you would have the same good reaction of Barnabas and Paul. On the other side of the handout, I'd like to read a little bit to you. I was just trying to look at some of this as try to give some reason why these people believe such things. Why these people thought they were gods. There had to be some reasons, and there's many possibilities. I have on the handout there was an ancient story that reportedly appeared in a collection of poems written by the Roman poet Ovid, and that was written about 8 AD. The work, called Metamorphoses, included more than 200 tales taken from the favorite legends and myths of the ancient world. What I'm about to read to you may or may not be accurate. In other words, people say this was a myth, this was a story that was written. And I'm not saying the story is true. I'm not even sure the story is exactly was done. All I know is through history, this is like a story that has survived over time. But if this story is true, if the story is true in that it was spoken and recorded and believed, I'm not saying I believe it, I'm not saying you should believe it, but I'm saying maybe this would help us understand why the community was so quick to think they were gods. It certainly would make sense. It certainly could be logical. Whether or not it was exactly true, I don't know. I'm trying to help you understand why would these people act this way toward Paul and Barnabas. The story goes something like this. Once upon a time, the king of the gods, Zeus, and his messenger, Hermes, visited ancient Phrygia. They went from home to home seeking hospitality. Since they were disguised in human form, people were not interested in letting them into their home for the night, except for a poor elderly couple named Philemon and Bacchus. This couple scraped together a meal for their visitors, but they couldn't help noticing that no matter how much food was consumed, it never seemed to run out. The couple realized that they had been entertaining gods unawares. The couple was told to leave town for a while because Zeus was going to turn their tattered little cottage into a temple, but not before destroying the rest of the town for its lack of hospitality. So the myth, the story, the legend was told. It's recorded for us today. You can look in the book of poetry, and you can see all sorts of legends. We were talking in the interactive Bible study. I have forgotten all the history. I've forgotten all the stories about the Greek gods and the Roman gods. I had to know them when I was in school because I had to regurgitate it back to get a good grade. But I've since no longer kept up with it because I'm not interested in all the mythology. Mythology is not a part of my life. But for them, this mythology, this purported mythology, was a part of their life. So this could explain why here Paul commands this man to stand up. And this man stands up, and they're like, oh, this happened once before. Once before the two gods came, it's happening again. And so they quickly they call out in verse 13. Then the priest of Zeus, because there was a temple right at the front of the city. Zeus was the main god. They had a main priest, they had this big temple, and they brought the oxen and garlands to the gates, and they were going to sacrifice these animals. These people thought these two men were gods, according to the mythology. According to a story that had happened purportedly earlier, they looked and now said, wow, it's happening again. We don't want our city destroyed, so thereby we have to treat these men specially. But the reaction I want you to learn from as a Christian living principle, the reaction of the two men is great. And this is the reaction I think you and I should have, no matter what the mythology is, no matter how convincing people are about how special you are. Because when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard this, they tore their clothes and ran in among the multitude crying, "Men, why are you doing these things? We're people like you. We're the same nature as you. We preach to you that you should turn from these vain things to the living God. God who made the heavens, who made the earth, who made the sea, who made all things that are in them, and who in bygone generations allowed all nations to walk in their own ways. Nevertheless, he did not leave himself without witness, and this he did good. He gave us rain from heaven and fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness." The reaction was, no, don't worship us. No, don't put us on the pedestal. Now you might say, most people I know would not accept the title of God. But would you accept the title of special messenger? If someone came up and said, you are an apostle as recognized by a rank. You are an evangelist as recognized by a rank. You know, a lot of people would say, oh, I'm glad you finally recognized me. Oh, I'm such an honor. See, the problem is a lot of these people, if they're approached that way, they think it's from God. And if they think it's from God, they think God is giving me this special honor. How many people, I've told people before, I have met 13 of the two witnesses. I've met 13 of them. The number keeps, I'm not talking about who I hear are two witnesses. I mean, people who have told me I am one of the two witnesses. And obviously all 13 can't be right. Personally, I don't believe any of them are. Okay? But, and I'm dead serious. I've said this many times. I'm dead serious. If any of those 13 are the real two witnesses, I want to talk to our Father in the kingdom whenever he's ready and say, Dad, can I have the attention of all of mankind? And can I say a few minutes? Because I'd like to say, men and women, friends, and the family of God, these two people told me they were the two witnesses. I didn't believe it. I was wrong. They really are. I apologize. I'd be more than happy to say that in the kingdom. But until then, I don't believe any of the 13 are the two witnesses. And if you come up afterwards and say, Ron Avey said I was one of the two witnesses, so I really must be. I'm going to say, well, Ron Avey's still suffering from his surgery. You're not one of the two witnesses. I just picked somebody. I could have picked anybody. But see, if you come up and say you're one of the two, and again, and if you really turn out to be one of the two witnesses, I will apologize to you and to all the heavenly host. I apologize to everybody. But I've met 13 of them, and see, if they're really not one of the two witnesses, then they failed the test that Paul and Barnabas passed. Because someone's come up to them in either a dream or a vision or Satan himself or just drugs or whatever, or just being tired or a virus, because sometimes a UTI. Seriously, folks, I have learned over the last 5 years, a urinary tract infection has caused people to come up with some strange hallucinations. I have visited people in hospital who have hallucinated and wondered what it was, and it was simply a UTI. So again, when I hear if any of you have a UTI, I take that real seriously, because people come up with some strange thoughts. So is it from God or is it a UTI? We'll find out. We'll find out what it is. The point is, I'm hoping you don't fail this test. I hope you don't, in my opinion, embarrass yourself to accept this praise. And you may say, but you may say you know a lot of people, even among the Church of God, who are suckers for praise like that. You may know a lot of people who are suckers for power like that. Well, I don't know if we'll get a chance to help them or not. You can certainly pray for them. And maybe someday you can be a tool in God's hands to help them realize they're not as special as they think they are. But the thing is, we're not looking to be special. We're looking just to do our job. All of you are servants. All of you are servants. You serve your family. You serve your community. All of you are servants. But you don't have to be the special one and only, the best one in the world, the only true church, the only true servant. That's just a really satanic plot in my mind. Delusions of grandeur. But anyway, so they gave that response. But these people were not easily, they were not easily convinced by those great words that Paul and Barnabas said. Because look at verse 18. When these things, they could scarcely restrain the multitudes from sacrificing to them. As good as you thought those words were, as beautiful as those were, men, why are you doing this? We are men like you. As good as those words were, they weren't convincing the multitudes, because the multitudes believed the myth. The multitudes believed the deception, and they were like, they really are gods, and they really are special. And thereby, we've got to sacrifice to them. We've got to bring these animals to them. And the two of them are saying, no, 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 we're not special like that. And they were having trouble convincing them. Let's look at a couple quick Old Testament verses. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 4. Do you know the real plot to have someone feel special was back in the Garden of Eden? It's one of the oldest tricks in the book. It's one of the oldest deceptions in the book. You know the story of Garden of Eden. The serpent came up and said, can you eat of every tree in the garden? And they said, yeah, we can eat of all but this one. We're going to die. So Genesis 3, verse 4, the serpent said, oh no, you're not going to die. That's wrong information. God told you you'd die if you ate of that tree. Oh no, that's wrong. So he's undermining the credibility of God. But then he goes beyond that by just saying that. Verse 5, he says, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. You will be special. You know, brethren, we believe in a calling. All churches believe in a calling. My Baptist friends believe in a calling. My Lutheran friends believe in a calling. We believe in a calling. It's how you define that calling. But if the calling is this way, and this is the way too many people take the calling, you are special. You are better than anybody else. That's not the right track. That's not the fruit of the Spirit of God. If a person is truly called, they are called to serve. If you are called, you're called to serve, not called to be applauded, not called to have the special information about prophecy, not called to have special doctrine that no one else has. That's not what this is about. If you're called of God, you're called to serve. But see, the serpent said, God knows in that day you eat of it, your eyes will be open, you'll be like gods. So don't be surprised if one of the most basic tricks in the book is you will be special. But see, Paul and Barnabas said, whoa, we're not special like you're describing us special. No, it's not like you're describing us. Let's go to Judges chapter 8, verses 22 and 23. This is a great example. This is a great example of Gideon. Judges 8, verses 22 and 23. Gideon had saved them from the hand of the Midianites. He had saved them. He'd helped them. And they were so thankful about Gideon helping them. Look at Judges 8, verse 22. When the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, you and your son and your grandson. Remember the system back then? Was a priesthood system. It was a family system. The priesthood's not a family system in this physical family system like it was back then. So when you see church organizations work in a family system, it's just not biblical. I mean, people can set up their business any way they want to set up their business. But I'm trying to tell you the difference between a religion as a business and what's biblical. But back in that system, in that priesthood system, have you and your son and your grandson, could you rule over us? And Gideon said, I will not rule over you, and neither will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. Let's go back to Acts 14. Do you see the message we're trying to get here? When those people, whether believing myths, people of sincerity, or whatever their motivation was, when they said, you are gods, we are going to worship you, we're going to make offerings to you, we're going to sacrifice to you, how many people would have succumbed to that? Brethren, do you know how many religious people succumb to that today? I think we're going to be so shocked at how many people succumb to praise and power. Power is not the way of the church of God. Power is the way of the Son of God and the Father. But power is not the way of the church of God, not the individuals who claim to be part of the church of God. And thankfully, people like Barnabas and Paul said, no, we don't want anything like that. So in this message today, I'm trying to encourage you to avoid that kind of temptation. And let me give you a last comment. Let's say you have been given great respect. Maybe people have really given you high praise. And that can feel good sometimes. I understand that. But I want to point out a reality. We don't know the difference, the time difference between verses 18 and 19. We don't know the time difference. When you read it, it's 1 second different. But it might have been weeks difference, it might have been months difference. I don't know the exact amount of time between 18 and 19. But the same people who wanted to worship Paul and Barnabas, these same people who wanted to make sacrifices to Paul and Barnabas, were ready to kill him. Later, because the Jews from Antioch and Iconium came down, having persuaded the multitudes, they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, thinking he was dead. And you understand, this worship type of approach toward people is immature. Trying to stone people is immature. Don't be surprised when the people who want to worship you and want to praise you and want to flatter you, don't be surprised when over a period of time they will want to kill you. Because it's not real. It's not genuine. It's not godly. It is not deep. It is not righteous. So don't fall for the fake flattery. Don't fall for the fake power. Don't fall for the fake praise. And don't be surprised if those same people who seem very sincere, seem very determined, if they sometimes have that same determination to hurt you. Understand the way God works. Understand the way God wants His people to work. And by looking at the story of Acts 14, I hope we can remember the story of Zeus and Hermes.